Hey, Andrew, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, thank you for being available. In fact, I'm very happy that I think it was one of your staff members that reached out to me and said that I feel as though Andrew would be great on your podcast. And when I received the message, I was like, okay, who is this company and who's Andrew? And I had a look and I was like, wow, neurofeedback. What is this? You know, I had a little read on neurofeedback.
hmm
Um, but I'd like to hear how you would explain neurofeedback, like how it would benefit us. Just what is the whole thing, really?
Sure. At a high level, neurofeedback is biofeedback on the brain, on the central nervous system.
Mm,
Uh, Breaking it down a little further, you can train, you can exercise and condition and change the sort of regulatory resources in the brain the same way you might train your body. Um, there's a couple differences in training your brain and your body. The brain actually changes a lot faster than your body. So you can make massive performance changes in a few months often if you apply the right kind of circuitry development. Also, the brain changes if you're working on things that are always in play, like attention, sleep, stress, speed of processing. Once you train those to a certain level, they stay there because you're using them there. Kind of like if you had really weak legs or something, and you
mm,
went and developed really beautifully strong quads and everything else, and then your habit was going for a hike every day, your legs will stay strong. Your habit's sitting on the couch drinking soda, not so much.
mhm.
So the brain resources, once you regulate them, because they're kind of always being activated and used, they tend to stay changed after a few months of neurofeedback, which is the lovely thing, is you can actually go, my tension, my stress, sleep, mood, can be re-regulated. And then we can often dig in more specifically. So, broad fitness perspective on regulatory stuff, but then you can go after things like OCD or PTSD or ADHD or seizures or migraines. And many of those things you can think about, again, in a body analogy, it's part of the body, but it's
Mhm.
kind of like, resources being a little bit cramped or pinched. And many of the anxiety phenomena are not unusual phenomena in the brain. They're a natural resource that kind of ramps up and then ramps back down appropriately, usually. One example
Mm.
is the back middle of the brain is the posterior cingulate cortex. Its job is to evaluate what's happening around you and get you to reorient your attention if you have to do something different. Like if uh, uh, you hear heads up and you look up and catch the ball, that's the posterior cingulate doing its job so you didn't get smacked in the face with a baseball. Or
Right.
if you're looking at the floor of the car when you're driving, that sense of watch the road, because you realize for 3 seconds you weren't looking at the road. That's the posterior cingulate throwing a flag in the play saying, you really should reorient your attention because you might not be totally safe at the moment. We all have one, we all use it, it's lovely, but some of our brains learn the world isn't safe or predictable, and it cramps up and it gets stuck in this evaluation mode. And then we worry, we're threat sensitive, we ruminate, we chew on things. So if you look at someone's brain, a lot of the perspective of neurofeedback reframes things that used to be, mental illness or suffering or stuff that your mind is doing into
Yeah.
physiology. You're like, oh, your posterior cingulate's kind of hot. You ruminate a lot. Oh, you do? Kind of like looking at, muscle tension. Oh, your erector muscles, your lower back are kind of spasmed. You have some lower back problems chronically? Oh, you do? Okay, these muscles are spasmed to protect you. Let's rebuild that lower back, work on the range of motion, make those muscles not stuck in this static kind of spasm mode. The same way you can re-exercise, rework the cingulate in the back to get it to not be stuck in this sort of threat sensitive mode. In a matter of weeks, you can kind of pull the teeth of PTSD, for instance, doing that kind of reworking, because that's one of the main circuits involved with classic, if you will, PTSD. And
Mm.
that you can go after different resources and attention, stress, sleep. These are all things you can kind of break down, like you'd work with a personal trainer to design the performance resources or the physique or the look you want. You can kind of do that for your brain in a lot of ways. That's the very high level.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You know, you put it a lot more beautifully than what I read and understood it. It's yeah, just all these things that goes on with the brain. It leaves me, I don't know, like I'm so amazed, and I've been quite fascinated with the brain for years, probably because I felt myself I have never been able to know how to fully tap into the right parts of the brain so that I can activate it. You know, there's certain days I wake up and I feel incredible, and there's certain
Sure.
days and I'm like, I'm not really feeling that good, and I'm trying to work out what has affected my my flow state and my sense of well-being and that sort of thing. I find it quite fascinating.
Well, you've been taking control of your body, your brain, your performance in very elite ways for years. You've been developing resources into, very particular high performance ways. You're a high performer. But humans are good at adapting to performance. We're not great at hanging out at one particular configuration. We actually are shiftable, changeable creatures. So I'm sure you would agree you can get in performance shape, and then it's hard to maintain yourself at the absolute peak of, whatever that is for you in performance or clarity or speed or flexibility, physically and mentally. You wake up some days, you don't have the motivation or the drive, you have other days. That's normal, it's typical, but some of that is typical variability. Some of that is your brain getting stuck or getting, regulated in a way, like a cramped muscle that wasn't quite worked out, or some old scar tissue in a joint or something that you need to, address. And I think if you take the perspective on this being a little bit mechanical or physiological, it really does give you a sense of control and agency over a lot of this stuff. And, I sort of think that we're now in 2020 in the same rough time frame in the brain as we were in body fitness in the 50s. We were doing all this stuff in the 50s that worked. We didn't know why, but like the best diet for some of the best athletes was super low carb and high fat. We didn't know why they were eating eggs and steak and that was it to get incredible fighting shape, but it worked. And so we had all these things, these levers we were pulling in regulation that were effective. And we're kind of flying, in some ways, counter to what was understood at the time to be healthy. Like these guys doing crazy things, raw eggs. What are you doing? People die from that, theoretically. But they were finding real effective levers to make change. And we don't understand the brain deeply, I would say, enough or thoroughly in any real way. But we have hints, and we get a little sense of like which, circuit or which resource is functioning this way. We're getting closer and closer to having an understanding of the brain is almost as thorough as the body. There's some things we really don't get, like how we, produce the sense of awareness. We have some sense of that, of consciousness and things, but not a very good sense, or memory. We don't really understand how memory is stored in the brain. It's kind of a mystery.
What about?
But we understand how stress response works on a handful of different ways of being stressed or attention.
Sorry, I was just wondering, it's said that we use about 10% of our brain. Now, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before we get in, I know you're going to have a comment on that. And that's where I want to get into. Now, I understand that, that's been said over time. And what I want to know is that true? Or is there a variability in terms of each individual? And how can we maximize our brain's potential to bring it? I don't know. Maybe we already use 100%, but we use it, I don't know, in an ad hoc way. We don't really understand it properly.
Sure.
Yeah, could you just give us a breakdown into that?
Sure. Let me unpack that a little bit. We don't want to use every resource at 100% of activation all the time. Just like you don't want to keep walking around like this all the day. You want to have some range and some flexibility and turn things off and on. And most forms of human brain sort of health, aging, and performance require regulatory range. Just like insulin. You don't want insulin to go up and stay up, or cortisol, or even growth hormone. You want these things have to oscillate. They have to cycle. So your body can go into different modes. And the same is true with the brain. You have to go into sleep modes. You have to go into awake modes to do things that are necessary. Now, in terms of activation, you're using a lot more probably than 10% of your cells at any one moment in time. It's not 10%. It's a lot more than that. You've got several 100 billion cells in your brain. 100 billion neurons, and probably twice that in glial cells at least. Wow. Vast amounts of information flow going on, and all those cells can talk to each other effectively. I mean, they don't, but they can. So they can make new processes and like make new friends and make new circuits. And that means the information density of the brain is at least the number of neurons raised to the power of the number of neurons, or the number of cells. So 300 billion raised to 300 billion. That estimate is actually larger than the number of atoms in the universe.
Oh, wow.
Density that's potential is larger than there is stuff everywhere. So it's an infinitely variable. It's a holographic sort of information storage system. You can save things as equations, not as pictures.
Mm.
And so stuff is very, very efficient, and you can use the same equation, if you will, or term in an equation for storing multiple memories. So it's very, 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 very packed down, but also kind of echoes. Memories are distributed throughout the brain. So back to activation. When you're doing stuff with different circuits, they come online and go offline. But even when they're offline, they're still doing stuff, metabolic processes. And if you had every cell in your brain fire at once, every neuron fire at once, or even a significant fraction, 30, 40%, we call that a seizure.
Right.
And it kills you if it happens too often. Seriously, those grand mal epileptic massive discharge seizures are frying the brain with electricity. It's a lot of stuff happening. You know, one of the reasons that the brain doesn't feel is because so much stuff is happening up there. The brain has no sensory nerve endings. You can't feel your own brain, which is odd because the brain's feeling everything. It's perceiving everything, but it can't feel itself because it's surges of electricity and heat and chemicals and all kinds of things going back and forth. Imagine how uncomfortable that would be if you had like lactic acid surging back and forth in your bicep all day long or something, you know, changing, how distracting that would be. So we don't feel the stuff up here. And that's, you know, one of the things neurofeedback gets you is some closing the loops. Your brain understands what it's doing and can be gently pulled around into new modes. So we don't use all of our brain, but you do activate certain things more chronically or less often or with less stability. Like if I asked you to, you know, count rapidly back from 100 by 7 or something, you could probably do it. But if I asked someone who's 100 years old to do it, it would be a little harder because there's a speed of processing pinch that starts to creep in and a working memory pinch that creeps in with some aging processes. So, you know, if you're really flexible in all of the resources, you don't want to have them statically active. I mentioned the cingulate in the back. We have one in the front called the Anterior Cingulate. Its job is to switch your focus, essentially. What's important to value or to attend to. The Anterior Cingulate will get extra active if we are like super in love. Oh, I love this person. I have a crush. Oh my gosh, this thing that's upset. You know, that's the Anterior Cingulate. It's also what lights up or gets kind of active when we have a song in our head. Mm. Or when we're, you know, biting our nails and can't stop, or we have full-blown OCD. The cingulate's this big red blob of beta waves, very active waves. You want it to be able to shift into beta if you're focusing or directing your attention, and then let go if you aren't. So if I see a hot cingulate in the front for someone, they're probably either they have some OCD or they're a CEO. I have no idea which it is.
Well, what's CEO?
The head of a company.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. I thought it was another.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to figure out how to tell that little joke better because the context framing always catches people. But, you know, it's this hyper-focus ability. I can't tell if it's working for you or not. I can tell it's unusual looking at your brain. But if I look at your brain in the front and say, oh, your cingulate in the front's kind of hot, you know, beta waves are much more active than is typical. Often that means people perseverate. Do you get stuck in your head? Oh, you do? Does it matter? Oh, it doesn't matter. You like it? Okay. Oh, it matters. Let's train that down. And then here's the thing, you don't lose the ability. It's kind of like brain resources that are stuck or extra active, especially ones for anxiety or trauma, or kind of like superpowers that have become kryptonite because they're stuck.
Right.
You know, Midas starved because he couldn't eat the gold that the food turned into, right? There's something about these extra powerful resources that don't work when they're all the way up to their maximal exertion. You wouldn't be functional if your quads were always fired. Wouldn't walk around very well if you couldn't relax your quad, couldn't put on stairs especially, right? Wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. The same is true with like threat sensitivity and attention selection with these cingulates. And then you have other circuits for like scanning the environment in the back of the head. Most of us close our eyes and the visual system powers down a little bit, goes into more alpha waves because it's expensive. You open your eyes and it wakes back up into more beta. That's what it's supposed to do. So if you close your eyes, it stays lit up in beta. That's the brain remaining hypervigilant, preparing to scan. But if you open your eyes and it doesn't switch into beta, that's the brain being like, huh? What? A little inattentive, you know?
Right.
Little Keanu Reeves circa Bill and Ted. So you want the modes, the brain to be able to switch in and out of multiple modes. Often many modes a minute, in fact, or many modes a second, depending on what's happening, what circuit we're talking about. And the regulatory flexibility of these circuits is actually much more important than where they hang out necessarily at any resting place. But the resting places often give a hint about like, oh, that's cramped, or that's pinched, or this is slow. Like you can look at an elder who's 60, 70, 80 years old, and if their alpha waves are slower than average, you can predict speed of processing and word finding issues.
Sorry,
You know?
can I just
Sure.
intervene for a sec? You know, times when you really want to study something and your brain just is like, "Pff, do you know what? I've got other plans." And you're really trying to focus and it's maybe focusing on something else, or it
Yeah.
decides it does not want to focus on anything. It just
Yeah.
goes randomly on different subjects. Is that something to do with what you're mentioning there, where you're trying to force it to do something, but it's like, no, I want us
It's
to.
kind of the opposite. It's a related feature, but it's kind of
Okay.
the opposite feature. What I was describing was using gas pedals, getting stuck in certain resources. What you're describing is having certain circuits with air in the brake lines. The
Right.
inhibitory tone isn't quite as regular. So we have a circuit on the right-hand side of the brain that's involved with supervisory attention, helping you direct your focus and know if you're paying attention. And it coordinates circuits on the front and back of both hemispheres. You know, awareness and prefrontal, and then visual direction and attention. There's this little guy that sits right here, kind of keeping it all going, so you know that you're doing the thing you want to do with your mind and your focus. This can fall asleep or be overburdened or be just set at a low activity level. And then you're more stimulus driven and less choice driven. You know, you can tell
Mm,
this area is low if you have a really hard time with things that are boring, but really easy time with things that are intense.
right,
If you're
right.
the guy on the sports field or the trading floor, but gosh, kill me now in a boardroom or classroom, this area, you know, is high in theta brainwaves, and you have a brain that's biased to be driven by the environment. So
Right.
whatever it is, you can adapt to. You're that guy, but you can't adapt to no information, which means those low classroom and boardroom kind of artificial modern worlds doesn't work for the hunter brain that is looking for dynamic change and novelty and is thriving on it. You know, if you're ADHD, you're stuck really far often into that hunter kind of brain. If you're AD, you're often stuck into the gatherer brain, very heads down, but you can't reorient. And most of us can switch back and forth between those modes. Some people get stuck, get cramped in one of those two modes. So if you came to me and said, look, I can't focus on stuff, it's really important to me, I have this big goal, I know I want to do it, there's no cognitive or emotional stuff in the way, it's all like I'm sitting on the focus, I just, boom, it just can't do it. All right, let's look. We'll probably see a lot of theta brain waves with your eyes open. It's a little
Wow.
harder to direct your attention. And so we'll just measure them moment to moment. Here's the operational piece. This is neurofeedback. So to make the changes, we would take a couple ear clips and stick them to your ear to measure broadly the head. And then off one particular spot, this little guy on the right that measures supervisory attention, or does supervisory attention, if you will. Would measure right there how much beta and how much theta you're making moment to moment. You're making lots of different brain waves in every spot at all times. But
Mm,
as they fluctuate, the theta and beta, when beta goes up, this guy's coming on more online. And when theta surges, he's kind of like chilling out and becoming less active. So moment to moment, we watch this with one single electrode. And whenever for half a second, your brain happens to shift both waves in the right direction, we go, yay, brain, and make something happen on a computer screen, like you're watching a puzzle picture fill in, or cars race, or a Pac-Man eat some dots. And when your brain does more of the right thing for half a second, the game moves and makes some noise. And when your brain does the wrong thing for half a second, the game slows down or stops. So the brain
mm.
gets a little burst of applause for some things it's doing, and it starts to engage in trends that give it more rewards, more information. And oddly enough, neurofeedback is largely involuntary. You can't change your brain waves. You're kind of sitting there going, all right, why is this puzzle picture filling in every few seconds? I don't know, like mentally. But the brain's going, ooh, cool. Oh, wow. Oh, nice. And whenever it has more information, it goes, hey, wait a minute. That happens whenever theta drops. Oh, that's interesting. The brain, you know, non-conscious sort of brain being personified here. And what happens is you get a little bit of an exercise, if you will, with dropping that theta briefly every so often. It gets sort of pointed at with the information flow. The next day, your brain will do little bursts of dropping the theta to see what happens. Because
Amazing.
yesterday it produced information. So tomorrow, it'll happen a little bit more, and you'll feel that. You'll feel your focus coming a little more on or something. And as you build that resource, it's like progressively, you know, developing something new. It gets more stable, more strong, you have more self-control, if you will, and directed attention, less impulsivity. So
Mm.
if that's your goal, you also measure those things. You can measure impulsivity under boring conditions with very simple tests. So we do a lot of assessments of executive function, impulsivity, attention. And in like the case of ADHD, you know, adult or child, or head injuries or something, people come in with about, you know, on a bell curve for their age, 2 to 3 standard deviations off the bell curve, generally, maybe more. But they're in that kind of, that bottom third often of the bell curve, which is not ideal for attention scoring. And then after doing 40 or 50 sessions of exercising these regions, they're often on the same side above the bell curve, a couple standard deviations high. So you make often 4 standard deviations of performance change in 50 sessions of work on some of the classic attention difficulty. And that's largely permanent. So, I mean, this is a big, big change in performance. I work with athletes who get, who can drop into the zone reliably once a performance. Athletes and artists often have very similar performance constraints. It's often the ability to rest deeply, drop stress voluntarily, and then when they're in the flow or the zone, to drop into the mode for performance they need to be in. It's a lot of getting yourself out of mental states in some way. And if you train that creative flow state or access consciousness that you might get in a float tank or something else, you can bring those states up voluntarily and give the artist or the athlete the ability to sort of drop into that almost primal flow state that lets you use all the resources without getting in your own way a little bit. So this is not just for fixing problems, it's also for I want to be more creative, or I want to be a better listener for my partner, or less irritable when I'm home at night. A third of my clients are extremely high performers, nothing wrong, but would like to optimize. And then a third of the people with extreme problems, brain injuries and migraines and autism and trauma and everything else, seizures, and it's a big one. And then the last third are all of us who have a little stress, sleep, and attention difficulty. I kind of conceptualize that as like, the bread and butter of most gyms. Most people walk in and go, I want to lose 15 pounds and get abs. And they're like, all right, cool. You come to the right place, and then we'll look into some more stuff probably. And that's what a third of my clients, I'm like, all right, you want to optimize your sleep and get creative and fix your attention a little bit? Great. And they don't have any idea how much they're going to have a change in the next 3 to 4 months. And they often develop new performance goals and skills as they realize what agency they have, and you've seen that too, I'm sure, in the fitness world. Once people who are not in it at all, in your coaching, for instance, people that are like, I want to get fit, I have no idea how. You get them 2-3 weeks in, over that hump, over that first pain, the first, like the DOMs not showing up acutely the next day. And they're like, oh my God, my body, wow, things are changing. I feel incredible. And this motivation thing, this agency, this fire that's lit, that gives them the motivation to continue to make more change or to do whatever else they're doing. And that happens in the brain. Once you get a little hint of your brain fog, your trauma, your ADHD, your seizures, getting tractable to something you just did a few days ago, it really changes our perspective on the stuff we can't see. And that's my biggest, mission here is this is invisible. We often blame ourselves or others for having stress, sleep, attention, etc. problems. And, there's some real things that we should take responsibility for. And there's some acute things we often need help managing. But a lot of the stuff that's sort of invisible and a bit stigmatized is just basic resources that you can go in and tweak and understand better. And so I challenge people, but also give them the sort of opportunity to, take that agency, because just like you may want to, live healthily or perform better, physically, you can do so mentally. And it is accessible for most people. At this point in modern tech, I mean, technology is shrinking down, the costs have come down, a lot of the high tech that we can use to help train the brain, which is nice in this sort of post, pandemic world where people are more isolated. A lot of this can happen, on your own, so to speak, because technology is developing a pace, so to speak. So,
I think it's important to be able to, hack the brain, really. I think a lot of people are relying on external stimulants to try and get the brain to function, they're trying to, coffee, I have to hold my hand up. I've got a nootropic in my mouth, obviously my teeth is all blue, but that's due to my own, how can I put it? My own, it was self-inflicted. I went to bed late. So I'm feeling a little tired, and I'm trying to force the brain to do more than it can.
Which, by the way, we've always done. Since we've had brains, we've hacked them.
Yeah.
Seriously. Since probably before we were human, we've altered our brains. I mean, birds hang out in fermented berry juice to get drunk, and monkeys and things. Like animals seek altered states. They really do. So we were altering our brains since before we had human brains. And, even since we had sort of modern human brains for like 5,000 to maybe 32,000 years, we've been doing all kinds of rituals around altered states, religious rituals, ecstatic rituals, fasting. That's about controlling how we feel, meditation, yoga. So I think biohacking is a term, right? Marketing is a bit new, but it's not really new. I mean, and it's a natural human inclination to push at that edge of what we can do with all this stuff we're carrying around, right? So
let's talk about neuroplasticity. Well, like what would you say are the key tools? I don't know whether with what you were saying already about even people who have certain deficiencies and getting things back in line. I don't know whether there's a certain way in connecting certain pathways, but what are the key tools to create neuroplasticity for people?
yeah. So a couple things. One is it's important to know that plasticity is always happening. And not only are you always making new brain cells every day, I mean, the average 65-year-old makes about 600 or 700 new neurons every single day. It's actually pretty active.
Oh, wow.
But all the cells that are existing can remap and remodel and change their relationships with each other dramatically. So plasticity is happening. Shift happens. Get yours. Like it is happening. And so you have an opportunity to steer the change that is already occurring. You're never going to use all those cells, those 700 or so cells in, young, old, if you will, people. Even in you and I, a little younger than that, half the cells that are born, if you will, pluripotent stem cells that aren't quite brain cells yet, but become so, they kind of travel throughout the brain and turn into the cell they want to be. Half of those cells die because they aren't being used. They don't make networks. They don't make friendships with other cells and get trophic growth factors. So one thing, you have untapped plasticity, all of us, about half of our plasticity is not being used in terms of longer term big change plasticity. That's about skill building and learning and cognitive development. That is the opportunity. It's like a 5-week journey for those cells to turn into the kind of cells they want to be. So you have these these 5-week periods where you can make really big change in your cognitive emotional states in these sprints for 5 or 6 weeks. So that's my first tip is you got this kind of new cell growth thing happening. Why don't you hang out with the next 700 cells and everything comes after for 6 weeks and try some focused, whatever it is, some hack for about that length of time, because that's about what it takes to make a massive change. So that in terms of time perspective, that's useful, but go into a piano lesson for one day, if you didn't play piano already, the hand motion for one lesson will remap every single cell in the hand area in the brain the same day. Every single cell will move around the same day. So the brain changes very rapidly. You have momentary plasticity you can also tap into. And then things like yoga, meditation, neurofeedback, microdosing, fasting will all jack up plasticity pretty strongly. Exercise, novelty. A lot of plasticity is coming from the hippocampi, the seahorse-shaped structures in the sides of the brain that move memory out into the brain to distribute it and store it long term. And a lot of mood and clarity and drive and interest and understanding and intelligence are driven by how flexible, how plastic the hippocampi on both sides are. And it turns out anything that lifts depression does so by boosting BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, in the hippocampus. Nothing else that works. Basically, that's the final place where depression is lifted, is in the hippocampus, getting more active. And the hippocampus does lots of things like environment remembering and exploring as a direct circuit. It does memory formation, but its specific job is to explore the environment and take cues. So if you drop yourself into an environment you've seen before, it goes, oh yeah, and it understands the environment. So exploring environments, novel environments, causes a big boost of plasticity. So exercise is great for plasticity because your brain's reorganizing for signals the body's changing. But exercise out in a novel environment will double it or triple it, because now the brain has to encode the new environment as well, the exploration piece of it. And so anything new will always double your plasticity versus use just exercise, mental or physical exercise. If you had a novelty piece, it jacks up the plasticity dramatically.
That's quite fascinating. That's really interesting. Have you heard of a company called Wavi?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. They're a company. They have this device which goes in their head, and I believe it takes like a panoramic assessment of the brain.
Yeah, it's an EEG. Absolutely. It's an EEG, a measurement of electricity. They have a particular 4-minute assessment, and a particular sort of walled garden software. So they're about developing an ecosystem of assessments for practitioners to do quick assessments on their clients, like chiropractors, doctors, et cetera. And a lot of their assessments are focused on the ERP. There's an evoked thing in the brain called the P300, little wave that happens 300 milliseconds after you see something interesting that you want to notice. It's an attention thing. And so you can look at the P300 in terms of how big it is and how far back in the brain it goes as a function of performance. And that's a lot of what they're looking at, a database of norms across ages. And then you can quickly throw a cap on your client and say, oh, what's their P300 doing compared to the average person? It spits out some attention metrics. It's nice, but it's a very limited use of what I call quantitative EEG. It's one particular set of metrics they've centralized on as a commercial product.
Right.
But it's expensive. It's $7,000 per sized cap, you know, so it's really a clinical tool, not an end user tool. And it's also only giving you one or two basic EEG measures. And I think that, you know, you wouldn't want to just get a cholesterol measurement. You might want to get a DEXA scan or a strength measurement. Like, you know, you have to look at this stuff in lots of ways. So I use a cap. Actually, I'll show you one. Here's a cap. This is a QEEG cap. So you can take these things and put them on your head and squirt it full of gel and get the same locations you would have. These are the same locations the Wabi uses. It's a standard set of sleep study from the 30s. Develop these sort of standard grid of locations. You can measure those with a standard device. And then what I do is take that information and compare it to a database of several thousand people and generate several thousand comparisons. Here's how fast your brainwaves are. Here's the distribution across the head. Here is their connectivity patterns and the amounts of them across all kinds of metrics. And then you end up with, you know, a lot of data that basically plugs you against a bell curve of your age. And you see all these different things that are unusual. And you then go through them and say, oh, this thing for some people, like if I saw alpha, I don't see this for you, I can tell you're very, very quick, but if I saw that your alpha waves were running slower than your age by a standard deviation or more, I'd go, oh, you're having word finding issues, a little speed of processing? Oh, you are? All right, let's, you know, add that to the list. And, or the cingulates were hot. If we saw that they were really a lot of beta, 2-3 standard deviations out, oh, that might be something to talk about. So again, we don't find things that are problematic. We find things that are unusual, generate ideas about what they could mean, because stuff that's weird for some people is not a problem for other people. Stuff that's a problem for one person is a benefit for someone else, like this OCD and CEO kind of overlap in the front midline. It can be a superpower or kryptonite. So you have to kind of go through a bunch of data, and then I work with clients to paint them the picture of what all is being explained by the data. And I also do executive function testing. I bore you to tears for 20 minutes and measure your attention. And those two things together give us a nice framing, the physiology and the performance on the brain. It's very, very broad, and it's very, very sort of stable across time unless you're doing stuff to your brain. Like fatigue will throw off the P300, or an injury like that in the Wabi, for instance. But full brain mapping, you might see one feature thrown off, but everything else will stay stable, so you can make predictions about what's happening. You know, so it's kind of like learning to become your own functional medicine doc, if you will. When doing brain mapping, you don't necessarily know what the range of every little hormone is, but if you dig enough or work with your functional medicine provider, they can say, oh, that's one you should probably worry about, or maybe not. Or here's one that might get in the way for some people. You know, if someone looks at their testosterone's a little low, the cortisol is either super high or super low, a functional medicine doc knows that you're probably in pregnenolone steal, you know, kind of phenomena where you're shunting pregnenolone instead of into T into cortisol because you're so stressed, burning it all up, and it's sinking your T over time. That's a pretty sophisticated thing to see off of slightly FET and cortisol being either very, very low or very, very high. You have to know how the circuit works, so to speak, to go, sir, are you experiencing this? Oh yeah, I am. All right, let's add some pregnenolone, see if we can't shunt back into T production.
Sorry, is that through looking on brain mapping?
Well, this example is, I'm saying, is metabolic. People understand that, you know, in this biohacking space, they understand hormones. I flip back to an example, but in brain mapping, you can see stress, sleep, attention, mood, speed of processing, sometimes injuries, a lot of brain fog signatures, trauma, you know, those sorts of things is what the gross 10,000 foot view. Like, you can't tell how you're feeling from a blood test. You can't tell how you're feeling from a brain map, but you might tell that you tend to feel stressed from a cingulate that's hot. Might tell you tend to feel stressed from high cortisol in your bloodstream. may not be true across people, but it gets your doc to go, hey, wait a minute, is this interesting? So it's just kind of giving the metaphor in the body terms. But no, I don't look at that particular stuff myself, but we do give you a lot of the same perspective on stress and attention and sleep that you actually end up sometimes getting first from your body doc before your brain doc, because they look at stress features, they look at fatigue and things like that, and inflammatory markers and C-reactive protein. And inflammation's a function sometimes of wear and tear in the brain, or it's a long chronic process of everything getting inflamed and beaten up by living in the world. And you can kind of look at the brain. If you have a lot of inflammation in your body, your brain will have issues. I can see it. You'll have a sluggish, brain foggy, kind of state cognitively, and I'll see it in the numbers. It'd be really obvious. And,
oh my God, I need to see mine. Do you know what? Because my
oddly
training
enough,
is okay, but I don't know, man. My brain, sometimes I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Even if
How old are you?
sleep has been good. Yeah, sorry?
How old you are?
I'm 41.
Okay, so not even close to any age-related stuff. You got a good solid 15 more years before you should even think about anything age.
Hopefully.
Late 50s is when the first age things show up if you're unlucky.
Right.
You're a beast of a man physically, so I'm sure you're taking really good care of yourself in terms of fat and carbs, because most of what drives aging is high carb, is sugar. And you obviously aren't somebody who has a big sugar habit, right? So that lifestyle of keeping sugar low lifelong will keep your brain from aging rapidly for most of the big things that cause problems. So the only stuff you have to worry about as a guy in his prime is keeping your slow wave sleep intact. Because that's the one metric, slow wave sleep or deep sleep, delta sleep, dreamless sleep. That's the one thing you can actually measure. You can't measure REM, by the way. Everyone gets concerned about their REM measurements on these little devices. The REM's not really, don't worry about it. If you don't have REM, you go crazy in a few days. You'll know if you don't have REM. But deep sleep, actually, you can short yourself on. It's amenable to pushing on. So total sleep, watch the hours, and then deep sleep. You want to have a good hour and a half if you're an adult of deep sleep every day. I started a new kettlebell workout. I do workout twice a day now. Do Ashtanga in the morning. I'm doing kettlebells now in the afternoon, and kicked my butt last night. And I never get huge amounts of deep sleep. My deep sleep jumped from an hour and a half to over 2 hours last night because I beat my body up before going to bed. I was like, good job, body, for waking up. What's that?
Was that just before bed?
No, it was 2 hours. I stopped working out about 2 hours before bed.
Yeah, right.
I only did a 25-minute, kettlebell workout, but I was immediate muscle soreness, hit right away. And my second workout of the day, I was a fasting day yesterday. I haven't eaten in a little over 40 hours now. So I'm all pushing, and my body was like, good job. And it did exactly what I wanted it to do. But by looking at my deep sleep numbers, I'm now encouraged. Oh, wait a minute, that not eating and pushing super hard thing worked really well. I feel great today. I got a lot, I just did a little ketone breath measurement, and it was, the ACEs are surging. So I know that I'm pumping out tons of fuel to build me muscle, right? It's great.
What is that you done? Sorry, what was that?
Let me find my little device here.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out.
This is a Biosense device. My buddy's in St. Louis with Biosense device, and it warms up, and then you exhale, and it grabs the last bit of your exhale to get the deep lung air, and it measures breath acetone as a proxy for ketones.
Wow.
And if you grab the last bit of lung air, it's pretty highly correlated, and it's a pretty good device called Biosense. Real nice guys. And I like the device. They're still kind of getting it better and better. There's some things I don't like you can't measure twice in a row. So if you stop breathing smoothly, you got to reset it and do it again, which is annoying. Right. But you can watch your ketones essentially by watching your acetone, your breath acetone. And everyone thinks that they're producing ketones way sooner than they are, in my experience. I'm pretty good at fasting. I fast, every other day, a lot of the time for the past few years. And I do not produce any significant amounts of ketones via acetone measurement for 24 hours of fasting. It just isn't starting really. If I was pure keto or carnivore, it'd probably be a little faster. But I know because I look it up. You can see my ACEs are 9 right there. I know that my deep sleep surged last night. So I know I feel pretty good. But I can feel pretty good and kind of not know day to day what that absolutely means. Or I can look up my deep sleep, my total sleep, my ACEs, you know, and kind of track this stuff. So this is the agency I think we all have the opportunity to take, you know.
Yeah, I think it's good that there's tools that you can use to, you know, check these things and be accountable. Sometimes I do find that I'll wake up and I'll question how I'm feeling. How was my sleep? Let me check, rather than asking myself, how are you feeling?
You have to do both, right? Don't be a slave to your aura or your whoop, because sometimes they're wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Like every so often they fail to measure properly, or their algorithms and fit your own personal brain or body, and they're just not right. People come in and say, my aura ring says I got no REM for the past week. I'm like, are you psychotic? No, don't believe it. You know, or like, oh wow, all out of nowhere, I suddenly got 0 hours of sleep. I think I was asleep. Guess what? You were. You know, you probably had like the ring pushed up against, you know, your bed or something, or the whoop strap was flipped over, or who knows. You know, these things are devices. The map is not the territory. Don't believe the data if it's not sane. You know, like my whoop strap has this odd quirk of if I wash my dishes, it thinks my heart rate goes to like 250. It doesn't. It doesn't. You know, 15 minutes of washing dishes. Wow, what the heck? No, it didn't happen. I didn't feel anything. I checked the heart rate. No, that didn't happen, you know. But like, you have to be sane with this stuff, because all the devices, while accessible, are a little imperfect. And the devices that do more things will generally build in lots of features, but some of them are imperfect, which is kind of cool. Like there's one device I love, which is the BioStrap. It can do almost every single thing of all the devices. It does really complex sleep studies, looking at motion as well as heart. You can do SpO2 with it. It's really good. But if I want to do dedicated work, I pick up another device, because all the devices that add all of this stuff will do them a little imperfectly. Even the Whoop and the Aura do some things imperfectly, like REM. It's just not a very valid measure. So you have to kind of evaluate your tools. Like right now in COVID, I'm using this thing for a SpO2. So this is a sleep tracker for SpO2. I put it on my hand, and in 10 seconds, it warms up and does a real-time heart rate and SpO2 tracking. And in the app, I set alarms. So if my SpO2 drops below 95% or something, it buzzes and wakes you up.
Oh, right.
Apnea, maybe you have apnea or something, and you've got some concerns. You know, it's better to have, you know, be fully woken up and go back to sleep than be, you know, be starving for air all night long. Well, get one of these things. It's called an O2 ring from Welu. I really like it. But I was worried about, you know, asymptomatic COVID, and you can watch your tools. If your respiratory rate surges on the Whoop or the Aura, that's weird. You should watch that, because what will happen with asymptomatic respiratory issues or oxygenation issues is respiratory rate will climb to make up for it for a few days before you have any symptoms often. So you can watch respiratory rates on these devices. You can look at the Aura for body temperature, you know, and body temperature, if you start to track it for the first time, can scare you. People often don't realize it fluctuates by a full degree every 24 hours, maybe more, and not 24 hours against the Earth's clock necessarily. So if you track your Aura body temperature, you'll be like, what the heck? It's going up and down by a degree every few weeks. Well, yeah, actually, you're just catching your diurnal variation against the sampling rate. That's why it looks like it's shifting in time. But, you know, it's a couple degrees you should worry about, not 1 degree in terms of changes. But if you watch this stuff, then you know what you should worry about or take control of. So that's my real, you know, it's an agency, you know, championing message here. Whatever it is, you should know.
Yeah.
So.
You mentioned briefly about the heart rate variability, and I was thinking to myself, is there like if your heart rate variability is in a certain range, would that show that there's some issue with the brain, or vice versa?
HRV does affect the brain, and the brain does affect the HRV. It is a closed, in some ways, system, and you can train the system. You can train the heart rate variability by training the brain directly, or you can train the brain by training the vagus nerve input to the heart rate variability through breath pacing, basically. But HRV as an absolute number is not that meaningful person to the next, because it's a compound number that's made up of several different things the body and the brain is doing. There's reflexes involved with keeping the heart rate steady against position or against inhalation. As you breathe in, there's a reflex that actually surges the heart rate slightly. You breathe out, it goes down a little bit. But also when you do positional things, it changes. And then stress-based things will change it. So all these things are fighting each other and summing as HRV. But the absolute number of HRV for one person can be dramatically different one person to the next. It has no meaning. It's like body fat on a crappy scale. You can't believe the raw number. It's just hard to understand. But if you change by X amount, oh, okay, that's good. So don't be too concerned if your HRV on your devices, especially these devices, which aren't perfect for HRV. If the device, it's 30 or 20 or 15. Well, is it always like that? Not a big deal. But if it doubles one day, if it halves one day, that's a problem, or that's a good thing. That's what you should care about. Because I have a technician, a coach in one of our offices, who has an HRV rate that is in the hundreds, the highest the Whoop guys have ever seen. Higher than some of the swimmers who use it. The swimmers have some of the best HRV in the Whoop community. And she's an athlete, but she's not like, Olympian yet. She's just a good athlete, young, healthy, etc. And she's an HRV in the hundreds. Mine hangs out in the tens. It's like 35, 25. But if I work out really hard and rest really well, it goes up to like 65 the next day. That's as good as my technician having hers go up from like 250 to 300 or something. It's not, it's not better or worse. It's an improvement, and you have to grade it per person. It's a baseline at almost per person. So I would say take your average HRV and subtract it out from the HRV measurements you're getting, and then use that as your floor and watch for changes. And you don't want to have it decreasing over time. That's a sign of heart disease, increased stress, cortisol. That'll lock you into a rigid pattern. If it's decreasing over time, you should address that. Right. If it's increasing over time, you're doing a good job. And otherwise, look at how stressors that are good for you, like exercise, fasting, will actually decrease it briefly. And then after you recover, you should have higher levels. So you want to look at the circuit, do what the circuit should be doing, and make sure that you're pushing it around. Oh yeah, it's doing what it should be doing. Don't worry too much about, well, my husband or my wife's HRV is 3 times mine. And doesn't mean much.
Okay, all right. It's one of those where I'm always thinking the number should be really high all the time. And if it ain't, okay, what's brought it down? What's going on? Yeah. But that's cool to know. So if we just move on from that, talk to me about like dementia. What's going on with the brain? Like people who have dementia or, Alzheimer's and that sort of thing.
Sure. So dementia is a symptom of several different diseases, and dementia is a symptom of memory. Memory, as referred to in dementia, is usually about long-term recall, episodic memory, first-person memory, not semantic, not knowledge for information and facts. So even with Alzheimer's, people will still actually know who the president was when they were 20 years old. They don't lose facts or the meaning of words. You don't lose that. Actually continues to climb until you're very, very, very aggressively symptomatic. So the hippocampus in the temporal lobes moves memory out into long term. And the parahippocampus right outside the hippocampus is also involved with some of that. And those two structures also retrieve memory. So episodic first person memory is hippocampal. Semantic non-episodic, meaning is just outside that. So in the case of like Alzheimer's, you have a hippocampal, a medial temporal lobe atrophy, and the cells are being stripped out. And you lose first the center of it, the hippocampus. So you lose a sense of who you are, who your family is, but you don't lose a sense of the world because you still have all the semantic information just outside of that, unless the brain is very, very far gone. In fact, elders in general develop across, elders, healthy and otherwise, develop improved semantic memory lifelong. Every elder is better than you and I are, theoretically, at knowing more things. Even ones that have significant access with remembering who they are still know more things than you or I do because of accumulated information. So there's several different types of dementia, or it can come in several different syndromes. Frontotemporal dementia is vascular damage up in here, frontotemporal junction. You get a lot of emotional stuff there, memory things as well. Alzheimer's, other Alzheimer's-like dementias are really driven by oxidation of tissue, burning out the tissue. That's medial temporal lobe. There's some evidence that the brain has remodeling ability for synaptic density in neurons, the same way that the bone tissue has remodeling ability for osteoclast, osteoblast balance. You stress the bone, it builds more bone. But if you take statins, you strip yourself of bone tissue, so it's really, you can do bad things. Well, sugar cause or high amounts of oxidation in the brain and other stressors because of hormones that are super high, like CRP, a bunch of factors, 37, 38 factors in the body will make the brain flip. Amyloid, which is a signaling molecule involved in the innate immune system, cleaning up microbes in the environment from killing you. Amyloid is made by another protein, if you will, called amyloid precursor protein, APP. APP cleaves its length a couple different places depending on what it needs to do. And there's about 60 different places, but there's two main ways it'll cleave. And one of those APP cleaves into amyloid beta, which you've heard about. And amyloid beta, when it accumulates, signals the brain to start stripping out synapses.
Oh, wow.
It goes into a synaptoclastic. It consumes synaptic density. And when you have low amyloid beta, you're in a synaptoblastic mode, so osteoclast and osteoblast, building up more brain tissue. So in an environmentally dangerous, microbially dangerous environment like Papua New Guinea, let's say, or just some jungle somewhere, if you have high amyloid, you live longer and have clarity in your brain. So people in Papua New Guinea generally have amyloid-rich brains and have high APOE4 status, which causes oxidation of tissue and Alzheimer's, because lipid transporters, APOE is a lipid transporter in the brain and body. You have several variants, 2, 3, and 4. We have 2 copies. If you're APOE4, 2 copies of 4, you oxidize fats rapidly in your brain and elsewhere. Atherosclerosis and Alzheimer's and dementia things are often rapid through fat oxidation. If you're APOE 2, very little brain oxidation, but you have heart problems because of other forms of lipid metabolism. If you're APOE 2-3, it's the best of all protective circumstances. In Papua New Guinea, most of them are APOE4. In the US, wow, those of us that are 4 die of Alzheimer's really, really rapidly and have diabetes and have atherosclerosis. But in Papua New Guinea, they live the longest because the environment's microbially dirty and at least historically, maybe not today, but historically the main food was starchy tubers, high starch food. So they had lots of starch and didn't die of Alzheimer's or atherosclerosis. They lived long and prospered because the amyloid was cleaning up all the stressors in the environment. But in a modern world, Western world, we're eating sugar, pure starch at high levels without the microbes to fight. And the brain gets eroded, flips into a weird immune mode that doesn't need to be in. I think that's what's happening. We sort of call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes these days because of that.
I hear that.
But it's more complicated than that. It's not just Alzheimer's. Parkinsonian things are accelerated by the glycation of tissues, oxidation of sugar, just like Alzheimer's is. Lewy body dementia, one of the Parkinsonian cluster of things, the Lewy bodies, little clusters of altered tissue in the brain, the edges are glycated and rip through the brain rapidly when that happens. So controlling blood sugar in the brain is probably the #1 thing you can do to not accelerate all this stuff. I work with people in their 40s and 50s all the time who are concerned about their memory because they can't find words in the afternoon. And basically, unless your parents and grandparents died of Alzheimer's in their 50s, i.e. genetic variants of Alzheimer's, then you have a metabolic thing going on. And if you're healthy, then you don't develop metabolic dementias, like that. It takes a long time. Things happen like that, they're stroke driven, not dementia driven, which can produce cognitive issues. But again, that's what vascular tone, so.
Quickly, I have had a genetic test and it was shown that I do have the APOE4 gene.
4? Two copies of it?
No, one copy. Do
you know if it's 3-4 or 2-4?
3-4 or 2-4?
Yeah, because you have 2 copies of 2, 3, or 4 APOE. So you can have a APOE4, APOE3. You have 2 copies. So
I think it was just a single copy, as far as I'm aware.
Well, you have 2 APOE genes. You'll have 2 of them.
Right.
And you can have 2 copies of 4, or you can have 2 copies of 2, or whatever, a mix. 2 copies of 4 is the riskiest status for your brain flipping over into this amyloid-rich, stripping tissue out mode. It also is the risky status for developing heart disease, for atherosclerosis, because your fats oxidize very quickly.
Right.
It's like having a lot of LDL tendencies, perhaps, or a lot of triglycerides. It's kind of a problem in some ways. Not for you. You're keeping your carbs low. Your raw sugar in your brain and body low. So you won't actually feed into the APOE4 issue. probably, you know?
So, okay. So, I mean, there are days when I will have like, I'll call them sin food, you know, like some sweet treats every once in a while. Would it would probably be a bit more riskier for me then to have these moments of sweet binges, I'd assume.
I don't think it's risky for you to have moments of sweet binges. I think it's really risky to have a lifestyle that isn't careful.
Right.
I mean, you know, these are insulin and sugar and cortisol and all the stuff we think about. These are not one-offs. These are signals, and the brain and body adapt to them over time. Insulin goes up and stays up. That's an issue. Then cells get insulin resistant. But if it goes up every so often, it's actually kind of metabolically, you know, it's a good thing perhaps. I'm a big fan of knowing the rules with this stuff, this metabolic stuff, and then violating them with wild abandon about 20% of the time, just to like keep myself flexible. I don't want to fall into a coma walking by a donut shop. You know, I want to like have a donut every so often. But you know, if you keep pumping your sugar up, I mean, in the case of starchy carbs and sugars, the body develops a 2-week burst of oxidizable fats. HDL goes up from carbs for 2 weeks. Sorry, LDL and VLDL, which is the bad one, goes up for 2 weeks when you eat starchy carbs. If you eat bacon, HDL goes up for a day or two, LDL for about 2 days. So you know, binging on fatty food is a very short, you know, problem. It doesn't burn you for 2 weeks. Binging on carbs does.
Wow.
So you have to kind of like, you know, you have to manage this. I do a lot of fasting, so I eat carbs still. But if I was not doing fasting every few days, I probably wouldn't have carbs every day because it's just too much. My system needs to clear it, you know? So like, I mean, you look at my Instagram, it's full of baked bread and lots of lovely high carby food. But I can only get away with that because I have periods of no carbs and no calories, and I let things clean themselves out. So it'd be very risky for you with APOE4 to be that guy that sits on the couch playing video games, drinking Mountain Dew, sedentary, so increased heart risk, you know, increased sugar all the time. You will fall apart faster mentally and physically, perhaps because of APOE4. Your cardiovascular system, your brain will erode faster than somebody who didn't have APOE4 status in their lipid transports. Like me, I have 2-3. I have the best version for anti-Alzheimer's and anti-atherosclerosis, which is great because people in my family have died from Alzheimer's. I'm like, oh, really severely, and diabetes. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, oh, I don't have that one? Okay. Wow. And I'm a gerontologist. I thought I have the versions that make you protected against atherosclerosis and diabetes. I'm like, holy cow, how'd that happen? You know, good job. Some cousin or aunt somewhere. But knowing this helps you make choices, just like knowing that I got 2 hours sleep last night after hitting the kettlebells hard. You better believe I'm going to hit them hard tonight again.
Of course.
Instead of going, ooh, I was kind of sore today. No. It did good things to my body because I can see it. I can kind of feel it, but I have a number I can look at tomorrow morning and see if it did it again and help guide my behavior. So that's, I think, the critical piece. No matter what we're talking about, is you actually have control over a lot of the things in your brain and body. And we're at a place of biohacking, modern medicine. I mean, we have all kinds of tools to take control. Things that are exogenous inputs like the troches, things like doing neurofeedback with an EEG trainer, you know, meditation, ancient and modern techniques to biohack, nootropics, fasting. I mean, we know so much more. Functional medicine screens on methylation status to dial in your B vitamins. We know so much more now than we ever have. It's still a bit of a black art and a mystery, but you can dig in. And for yourself, you can find places to make change that is effective.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good. The fact we have the power in our own hands. What's your thoughts on circadian rhythm and the brain? Does it affect the way the brain works?
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
Massively. Yeah. And I think circadian rhythms underpin a lot of our human performance. Stress, sleep, attention, mood can actually be really thrown off learning by circadian dysregulation. I studied circadian systems in undergrad, actually, and then flipped over to EEG in grad school. But in humans, the circadian rhythm is easily pushed because we're kind of not diurnal nor nocturnal. We're kind of, you know, omnivores, so we kind of do both. But there are a few levers built in for circadian regulation. Our circadian rhythm, especially men, are longer than the Earth's 24-hour cycle.
Yeah.
Women are often a little longer, a little shorter. Men are often, a good hour longer. So we have to reset our circadian rhythm back to the Earth's photo period every day, in theory, or at least know where it is over time to reset to that same rough place. And people in biohacking circles are very concerned about light and screens. And I'm sorry, I'm a heretic here. I don't care about light all that much.
Oh, really?
And yeah, in fact, I think
Ooh,
wearing blue
okay.
blockers at night is a bad thing. I think the brain is not meant to have a narrow frequency of light like that. Yellow only coming into your brain after dusk. I think it's a bad thing. I mean, personally, I was suspicious when every time I put on a pair of blue blockers, I get a migraine instantly. But then I started asking other people who are vision scientists, and they're like, one frequency of light is generally not a good thing for the brain. It's some weird things. So I'm not a fan. Also, people do it for circadian reasons in theory, but light is pretty far down the list of things that hack your circadian rhythm. The number one lever that you have control over is not light, it's food. And the next is activity. And then you get to light. So light's pretty far down. If you're not sorting out the first two, forget light. It's just not, it doesn't matter. You're not going to fix stuff. So eating before bed will spike insulin and suppress growth hormones. You don't get into deep sleep and you don't circadian re-regulate. That's the number one thing you have to do. Fast before bed. Let insulin drop all the way. You get into deep sleep. 90 minutes later, huge surge of growth hormone, one giant pulse. And men and women who are north of about 35 or 40, that's the only growth hormone you're getting, essentially. So if you eat before bed and go to sleep, no growth hormone for you. And no deep sleep. You skim the surface. So the rule of thumb, go to bed hungry, wake up refreshed and full of energy. Go to bed full, wake up hungry and tired.
Yeah. That's interesting. So would it be anything you eat before bed would cause an issue with growth hormone? Any calories? Right. So there's no any insulin.
And some of us that are dysregulated, tasting sweet, non-carby things causes an insulin response, So what I tell people is you got to fast. Calories are okay. Sorry, calories are not okay, but flavor is. So herbal tea. If you or your kid needs a ritual or a flavor, make herbal tea. There's no calories. You do something, you taste something, you hydrate, it's great. But if you're like, clawing the walls 3 hours after your dinner, you're hungry, well, that's a sign you should keep doing this. But you should probably also have a richer, fattier dinner. So you have a long, slow decline of energy and not a blood sugar drop. And then you'll actually clear your energy without provoking a feeding response, because the brain wants to feed before bed, before you fast for 8 or 12 hours, because we didn't get up and eat right away. We got up and went and hunted the chickens in the forest, and then we ate. So the first rule is fast before bed. The second rule is consistent wake time within an hour of dawn, an hour of sunrise. Because that's the light cue our brains are used to seeing. That's the only strong light cue for circadian stuff, is the color of light within 1 hour after dawn. If you don't see it, light doesn't matter.
I think
the third rule is activity before you eat.
Activity before you eat, or like some sort of movement, physical.
Something, some days. Some days, go hunt chickens in the forest before you, eat your cave. But do some sun salutations 3 times a week when you get up or something before you put food in your mouth. Something, sweat a tiny bit. It's a very strong signal. And it's stronger than anything to do with light. Except for that morning light, that special blue light that's there within 1 hour. But the sun gets higher in the sky, the angle of incidence gets more acute, and that blue light gets reflected back out mostly into space. We don't see it after 1 hour post-dawn. So you got to see that light some days of the week, an hour or dawn or after. In places where it doesn't happen reliably, like Scandinavia, if you want to do light hacking, full spectrum light at an artificially set time in the morning is what you want to work on, nothing else. You don't want to do light boxes later in the day or in the evening. That'll deregulate you, perhaps.
That's so interesting, because I hear so much different stuff when it comes to light. Obviously going out in the light, the open air where you've got the full spectrum of light is the ideal. However, let's say, for instance, you live or you spend most of your time in an office where there's lots of artificial light around you, fluorescent tubes, computer screen, maybe mobile phone, then I don't know, because of the frequency of the light is so peaked.
The color of the light doesn't matter so much. It's the intensity by far that matters. The brain actually will the intensity, the two things that matter more than color. So like the whole blue blockers thing, color is not even like second or third in the list. The first thing is intensity, and the second is position. Your brain is looking for light right there. If it sees light right there, oh my gosh, it's the sun. Reset. If it sees light on your desk, it's a weak signal. So it'd be better to put on those like 70s shades that have like, you know, gray at the top and kind of more open in color at the bottom that
Right.
don't block colors. Those would be better for sleep hacking at night, is to work with those. Dim the overall brightness of light, period. That will allow melatonin to climb a lot faster than any particular color of light being restricted. It's intensity. And even waking up in the middle of the night and looking at your phone, bright in the middle of the face, delays circadian phase by 1 hour. That's it. And the body can adjust by 1 hour every single day naturally.
Right.
It's not a big deal.
Do you have any kind of like quantifiable like evidence on this, what you're saying? Like, you know, any kind of measures that you've done yourself? Or I don't know, peer review studies?
I've done a lot of circadian research, and mostly in animals actually, in undergrad. And I've mapped the systems in the brain that do circadian entrainment and sexual behavior, and it's related to the sun and things like that in rodents actually. Oh. But there's lots of research looking at this particular stuff in humans as well. Light is only really powerful in the morning. One of the people I would probably pursue his research to look this up is Andrew Huberman. Dr. Huberman at, I think, Stanford is very much into this end of the pool in how light, how timing, how the gaze affects your brain. So Dr. Huberman is probably, you know, you should get him as your next guest to really unpack some of the aspects of light, because he's the guy who sort of disabused my notions about the color versus intensity question. And it is, and actually I've seen some research as well from other people like James Swanwick from Swanee's Blue Blockers. James did some research too, showing that it's intensity that seems to really cause the problem. Like in some of his first examining the effects on the brain of the glasses he was pumping out. But this is not a poorly understood phenomenon at this point. There's lots of studies. If you go to PubMed and search, you'll find intensity matters, not color. It really is a much bigger issue. And that circadian entrainment is a morning phenomena because of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN. We have a nerve cluster that crosses behind the eyes called the optic chi, the optic X for the Greek letter, you know, chiasm. It's a cross. And each side of the retina in the back of the eye, there's this nerve cluster that diverges and then resorts. So we end up with the left visual field in each eye gets mapped to the right hemisphere, and it sorts itself. The chi is actually kind of doing this weird slit thing. And right above the optic chiasm are these two little nuclei, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN. And the only real big job of the SCN is to sample the color of light hitting the retina and tell the brain what time it is. It's the master reset. And then it sends other processes out to the hippocampus and hypothalamus and other sexual areas and does all the timing-based, you know, resets in the brain. And the brain does downstream flooding of timing signals and then resynchronizes all the body clocks and all the other modules everywhere else. They're all individual modules. The SCN causes the master reset. The brain's hormones cause a cascading realignment of all the clocks, if you will. And then, of course, there's cellular clocks as well that seem to do other processes. But the SCN is only impacted by light first thing in the morning, that color of light and that intensity of light that's, you know, blue and bright on the horizon.
Right. So would you suggest that early in the morning you should get out immediately to get everything all set up?
Yeah.
Opening the window is enough, then going out?
It generally is. And honestly, again, back to the idea that color is not as important as brightness. If you don't have a window, you know, or it's 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. in Sweden or something in the fall, there's no light, you know, there's no bright light. Intensity, like sitting in front of your bright monitor at 6 a.m. is doing some of that, because intensity matters more than the color of the light, apparently. So by the same token, don't sit there in your red light bank that's really bright at 7 p.m. Because the color, while I know it's not blue and theoretically shouldn't do anything according to the biohacker, you know, wisdom, it's not true.
All right.
Bright red light will actually make your brain think it's first thing in the morning because of the brightness component.
You know, I do have a panel, and I have had it some evenings, and there has been some evenings where I have felt like, damn, I feel quite awake right now. I need to do something, you know?
Yeah, because you were saying, oh, morning, you know?
Right.
Yeah, use bright lights in the morning only, and do not use any bright lights of any color in the evening. That's the trick on light.
Right. So, just quickly on that, without going too deep into it, I've got the red light panel also has the infrared aspect of it. Would that be all right to use in the evening?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
very likely. I'm a bit more a larger fan of regular traditional sauna than infrared sauna, because
Right.
I think the research is pretty clear that the tissue penetration, the heat shock protein, sort of systematic response is much larger when it comes to actually heating your body up versus infrared. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's not doing any versus infrared, infrared's still much better. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
the good exercise is the one that you do, not the optimal one. If infrared's okay. If you live in a small apartment, hang a panel on a wall or something. But if you got a backyard, get a cedar shed without chemical treatments in it and buy a $50 little, heater unit and sit in there and throw water on it. Steam yourself finish style. Seriously, it's much better for you.
That sounds cool.
But yeah, I would not use the visible light. I don't think infrared will probably cause any brain entrainment. I don't know for sure, but definitely we know the visible light does. And the intensity of the visible light is correlated to how strong the brain reacts to it.
Right.
So my guess is if you're perceiving something in the infrared, it could cause the same effect. And I would say, well, how do you feel? Do you feel a little bit jacked up as well? It's probably doing some of the same activation, because you may have the ability to respond to non-visible light. So there may be something to that. But if it doesn't feel like it wakes you up, if you don't use the visible, then it probably isn't, is my thought.
What about the light on your skin and not your eyes? This sounds a bit weird, but let's say I'm by the panel, I'm naked, but I've got on sunglasses.
Yeah, I think the skin can absorb light as well, and I think some of the timing stuff can happen in the skin. It's very particular for timing in the eyes, that suprachiasmatic nucleus. But the mitochondrial thing can be directly, the body can absorb light essentially, and it can do some light exchange stuff, I think, in the mitochondria, right? So I believe there are some health benefits from absorbing essentially light through your skin. I don't understand what they are fully, but I believe that sunbathing early in the day develops the body's ability to react to light differently. I've seen some studies on that. I'm not sure why that is, but again, that morning light's hitting the skin, morning's special in some way. We don't know why exactly, except we developed that way, historically. But morning light is very special. Morning sunlight in the skin appears to be the special flavor versus middle of the day sunbathing or something. Not as good for you. I don't know why, but morning light doesn't appear to be as carcinogenic or cause as many problems and many inflammatory stuff. You tan versus burn better. So the body
less intense, probably, isn't it?
Maybe, yeah. It seems to deal with it in a different way. So, yeah.
What about did we cover brain injury? Don't know if we did. I know we talked about dementia. I know you mentioned about brain injury.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much.
Produce dementias.
I'm sorry?
Brain injuries can produce dementias. Little scar tissue can produce seizures or dementia focus over time. But, also a lot of us have mild injuries. It's not a big deal per se. You hit 40, a sore shoulder or a knee or some scar tissue somewhere, it's the same kind of thing. Half of all brain injuries are silent. There's no symptoms. And then 10 years later, you're foggier, kind of anxious. You can't get rest from sleep. That's about the time course of silent injuries, about 10 years. Slowing you down, making you feel foggy. If you're not in your mid-60s or later and you're feeling that way, you don't have to. It might be a brain injury. It might not. You'll never know. You look at the brain, mild injuries don't show up as such. They show up as this non-specific fog kind of pattern. You don't know if it's because you have brain injury, because you have chronic stress, or because you're built that way and things kind of just eroded over time, but you can change it. So in severe injuries, you can see it in the brain. And then you would train the EEG, as I mentioned, but you also train the blood flow. With injuries, you train HEG, hemoencephalography. Put infrared camera on the head. Let me see if I have one here. I don't have one right here, sorry. You put infrared camera on your head and you measure temperature. You concentrate and blood and resources surge into your brain. You can practice pumping metabolism through blood flow voluntarily. in the brain. And over time, that produces a drop in fog. It dramatically reduces migraines, and it makes peak performers sharper and quicker off the mark. Because you have a stable metabolic, oxygen, glucose, etc., blood flow. And there's some evidence the brain may produce more capillaries over time. So you end up with like a brain's blood, fuel supply that is sort of stable under all conditions. Stress, sleep, and fatigue. Doesn't matter, just hangs out with rock solid glucose and oxygen. You
That's what I want.
Up. Yeah, right? So all my peak performers use that. And like, my buddy Ben Greenfield has an HEG, and all my other friends that, are peak performers, they all add that. And so do all these people with severe brain injuries and also autism. Because doing metabolic exercise and developmental things causes shifts. So you can pump the blood flow and go after another aspect of this part of the body, not just the regulation, which is the EEG. So you have a kind of a wide range of things you can go after in the brain, just like the body.
That's awesome. You've mentioned earlier about attention deficit disorder. You said ADD, but then you said ADHD. Did you say that those two things are different?
Those two things are diagnostically the same now in the DSM, the big manual that classifies. They're all called ADHD. Since 1987, they've all been called one thing. People don't really, but in common language, people understand ADD is spaciness. ADHD is like, wiggly kid or something. But the diagnostic criteria now, it's all ADHD with inattention, with impulsivity, or combined. That's how the criteria a psychologist would use. But in the brain, I'm always dropping one level below the psychological or medical diagnostics into the actual resources. If you're hyperactive or impulsive or disinhibited, your brain tends to make a lot of theta brain waves relative to beta, high theta-beta ratio. In kids that are not sleep deprived, you can predict ADHD blindly with one single measurement on top of the head, theta-beta ratio, with 94% accuracy.
Right.
In adults, it might be sleep or attention. You can't really tell it apart, but it doesn't matter. It's the same kind of phenomenon of impulsivity. And then for most people, if you open the eyes, the brain stays stuck in alpha. That's like getting stuck in neutral. It's hard to shift into gear. That's inattention. You can have ADHD with features of extra theta, impulsivity, or extra alpha, inattention. And that's the sort of more nuanced diagnostic criteria is capturing those different states. Is there are often one or the other, but you can have both. Yeah.
Is there a way of changing that if you have it?
Sure.
There is.
Absolutely. Meditation changes it over time. It takes 6 months to a year usually in the literature. Neurofeedback changes it in a few months. We make multiple standard deviations of change in a few months. So we just eliminate attention problems in people with attention problems. 3 to 4 standard deviations on that bell curve, basically. So you come in, if the middle of the bell curve is 100 points, on attention scoring, people with ADHD are like 40, 50, 60, pretty far down with a 15-point standard deviation. They're like 2 to 3 standard deviations off the mean. And after a few months of training, 40, 50 sessions, they're the same degree above the mean, generally.
That's amazing. Really Can I just want to get like a deeper understanding. It's probably because I'm a little bit tired and my brain isn't functioning as well right now.
I can show you some pre-post images if you want. You want to see some?
Yeah, sure.
Here, let me show you. These are not all ADHD, but let me show you. Let me share an image with you. I'm not enabled for sharing right now.
Is there something that I need to do?
Yeah, you can right click on me and enable sharing if you want, and then I can share it. Otherwise, I can.
Okay, share screen. What? Oh gosh.
No, what participants, you have to like enable sharing or something. It may be too much hassle right now in the middle of our show to do, but you can see ADHD phenomena pretty reliably on resting brain activity. It's really quite valid for many people, and we can make 2 to 3. Well, generally, we can make a standard deviation of change in executive function resources in both the brain maps and performance every like 20 to 30 sessions of neurofeedback, reliably across people. And a performance, that's a performance advantage as you keep ramping things up, and you just keep going until you're where you want to be. It's not about fixing ADHD. It's about, are you impulsive or inattentive? would you rather not be?
Yeah.
How much would you rather not be?
Yeah.
When are you done? It's like fitness, not medicine.
Yes,
It's not like, let me
exactly.
fix you. It's like, what do you want? I'll help you get
Yes,
there.
I
So,
get that.
so I often take ADHD people that have been struggling under a diagnostic, stigma. Oh, I can't go to grad school, or my kid's misbehaving because they're ADHD. And we flip it into, wow, look how rapidly and powerfully your brain switches gears. That's amazing. But that's kind of stuck a little bit. Your superpower is now your kryptonite, huh? Let's maybe exercise that and give you range of motion over that resource. And now you can be hyper-focused or, novelty seeking. Like the ADHD kid can play video games better than anyone else on the planet. They can hyper-focus for 27 hours and a half without a pee break, but they can't sit in a classroom for 2 minutes without, because they're relying on the environment to cue the resources.
Right.
But the resources are powerful when they're engaged properly, when they're lined up with the environment. So this person with a powerful resource, low theta, high theta, low beta, they notice everything and put the ideas together, and they're synthetic and pattern matching, but they get stuck in those modes. So you just exercise that part of the brain, and over time that supervisor comes online. And if they want to be focused in a boring environment, they can. It just comes up. Oh, I'm getting distracted, let me focus. And it shows up out of nowhere. The same way, if you did a bunch of bicep curls and then you came to a rock on the street you got to pick up, you weren't thinking, oh, wait, which muscle was it I worked out? Let me grab that thing, but let me activate my left bicep. It just comes online. You know how to use the whole system. And that's what happens when you exercise the executive function, the inhibitory tone and the sustained focus. As they're built up, you use them differently. I joke that if I took you out of a VW Bug and put you in a Tesla, your driving will change. You'll figure it out.
Yeah,
so
no
people are
doubt.
often like, oh, my kid's really ADHD. They need some therapy as well. Maybe the procrastination might be there still, but then the parent calls me, 2 weeks later and says, I asked him to take the trash out once and he did it. It was really weird or something, like people organize. I got up in the morning, my kid made breakfast. He's never done that. He made his bed. Or like the person says, I had a rough conversation with my spouse and I wasn't shaking mad afterwards. And I listened because I could pump the brakes on that inhibitory tone, that stress,
Amazing.
Or I could go into my public speaking thing without getting dysregulated into a sympathetic activation mode because I saw it happening and drop back into my HRV calm experience mode.
Amazing.
Or my migraines came up and I grabbed my infrared and shut it down before it showed up all the way. Again, the theme here is control or agency, I guess. We can all do this.
That's amazing. That is. So you'd mentioned about these different states. You got beta, theta, alpha, delta. Could you break down each type there are, and at what point would you expect each one to kick in? How we activate it?
We have all brainwaves all the time. You're making all brainwaves all the time, and you're often making the same different brainwaves in the same part of the brain. So certain brainwave states will dominate in certain cognitive or performance states. If you're deeply asleep and not dreaming, your brain's making a lot of delta. But if you're awake, you're still making delta, not as much in the cortex. Now you're making a lot of delta in the brainstem, mostly in the brainstem, to keep your heart and lungs moving, autonomic things. And then the brain also does some metabolic things in delta. So you don't think in delta, you live in it, basically.
Right.
Alpha is a neutral frequency, but there's at least 6 different things in the brain called alpha. And use it for dropping into neutral. You also use it for rapid switching of attention. You also use it for social processing, mu, for mirror neurons, is a form of alpha. Alpha is all kinds of things. And again, where in the brain, you close your eyes, the back of the head's visual. It should go into rest mode, alpha. You open your eyes, alpha should go down. So it's kind of like where in particular. Or the cingulate. It makes beta when you want to focus, but if it's stuck in beta, beta is an active frequency. So in order, going from slow to fast, delta goes from 0 to about 3.5 or 4 cycles per second, waves per second. Theta is 4 to 7. The top edge of that theta, 6.5, is memory access and creativity and receptive attention. Stuff floods up and bubbles up to you. Alpha waves run from 7 to about 13. There's a huge range and many things in there. SMR, a cat on a windowsill, completely liquid, relaxed body, but laser-like focus. That's 12 to 15 hertz. And that is, you've seen cats on the windowsill doing this. That's the opposite of ADHD. So SMR, you know, and also SMR helps you inhibit seizures and things like that. The beta waves above that, the teens, 12, 15, 18, you're thinking in that range. You think in the teens usually. And then above that, it's a stressy mind. And above that, you have gamma. And gamma cannot be measured from outside the head. People think they're measuring gamma in the biohacking world. They are not. Gamma is 40 hertz roughly. And theta is 4 hertz roughly at its resting. The timing phase synchronization between theta and gamma is human consciousness. If you break the phase synchronization, the 4 to 40 nesting frequencies, consciousness goes away. Anesthesia happens. You actually measure the coupling on the forehead using very sophisticated, expensive sensors. And there's a company that has these depth of anesthesia monitors now in hospitals. They can tell how conscious you are in surgery by measuring this coupling in real time.
Wow.
But also, like, meditation for 20 or 30 years increases the gamma coupling throughout the brain. Schizophrenia decreases it. So again, all these things, and then gamma goes from 40 up to at least 200 hertz and maybe even above that. When these things get faster and faster, they get smaller and smaller. So a delta wave is huge, you know, 10 microvolts, big wave, you know, nice and wide, giant wave. The same gamma, 10 microvolts of gamma, a bunch of little tiny waves. You can barely see them. And when waves pass through layers of tissue to be measured on the outside of the head, that attenuates them. Gamma is below the attenuation floor. You can't see it. And things above that 40 hertz, 38 hertz really, can't see them. So a lot of biohackers are like, oh, I'm doing gamma. No, you aren't. You're full of nonsense. Gamma's up there with words like quantum and detox. It's nonsense. Seriously, if I have one more biohacker tell me about their detox routine or their quantum this and that, it's like, really? Do you have any clue what you're talking about? I don't want to hear about your structured water, your quantum nonsense, or anything else. It's just stupid. Like, there's no such thing as detoxing other than the processes you're already doing. You can't change your pH. You can't change your alkalinity of your body without dying. The only alkalinity you're changing with your stupid pH water is that of your urine. You change your blood pH, you'll die rapidly. Good job. You know, like, these are just absurd flights from reality. And, you know, again, this fits into that same thing. Quantum, if you use the word quantum and you aren't a physicist, you just lost every shred of respect I have for you. Sorry, we're late in our call and I'm getting a little bit ranty. But, this is why you kept me on the phone for 90 minutes, right? You wanted to see what happens when
that's it. It's a little experiment.
The barriers come down. So, anyways,
cool.
Yeah. So there's things I worry about, and there's things we can worry about that are real. Like your blood, like your oxidative cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, VLDL, like your alpha speed for cognitive, you know, stuff. But you can control that stuff. You can't control other things, and people try to hang magical thinking systems on stuff they can't control. And because they think they understand bits of stuff, they end up with bizarre magical thinking. I mean, there's no connection between COVID and 5G, FYI. Zero.
Right.
Zero. But half my friends that are into like biohacking are also into stupid things like structured water and COVID 5G scenarios. It's like, really? I'm so sorry. I used to respect you more before you said this thing about, you know, the government trying to vaccinate us with a 5G. Really? Come on. So if nothing else, I was talking to somebody else recently. The silver lining of this pandemic is I figure out who the idiots and assholes are. In the space, because you know, it's just absurdity. You don't have to be absconding from your common sense to get into science, into biohacking, to work at the edge of what's understood. You don't have to adopt crazy belief systems. You really don't. You can go, I don't understand, and that's okay. You can look at phenomena and not have to think you have the answer. In fact, anyone who tells you they have the answer for the brain is lying. It's like, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill them. It wasn't the Buddha. Keep going. You know, this is, if you think you understand the brain deeply, if anyone has the answer for you deeply, they are wrong, or they're full of it. So this is your responsibility to navigate like it was in the 50s. Figure out what you got to eat to shred, what you got to lift, compound exercises. Wow, that's great. But then in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we all sat on machines and worked out this one little muscle, and now we're all back to doing the big five, because guess what? They figured it out 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, so, you don't have to elaborate and go after these crazy things like detox, and because it's just nonsense. There's stuff you actually can do to take control and serve that need to feel like you're making change without believing the guru. Nobody has information about your brain, your experience, better than you do. Seriously. All right,
True.
Stepping down off the soapbox.
No, that was all valid stuff. I enjoyed it. I think you mentioned earlier about physical exercise and physical exercise as opposed to a sedentary lifestyle has an effect on the brain as well. Did you go into detail about that as to, how it works?
Sure. It's just inflammatory stuff, not using our tissues. They all kind of fall apart. That's the general one. But the statistics on it are something like a sedentary lifestyle. When I say sedentary, the threshold for what that is keeps being revised upwards in terms of how much activity you need to make. From a gerontological perspective, we used to say 5,000 steps a day. And then a few years ago, it changed to 7,000 steps a day. Roughly is the minimal threshold for activity to not have your body fall apart because of activity, because of being sedentary.
Right.
Getting less than that threshold level of activity confers the cardiovascular risk equivalent to a 2-pack-a-day cigarette habit.
Oh, wow.
So being that guy who sits on the couch, drinking your soda, playing your video games, a little overweight, a little blood pressure, a little cholesterol, I'm still pretty healthy. No, you're actually conferring cardiovascular risk equivalent to 2-pack-a-day cigarette habit. Good job. Again, there's things we can control, and these are easy things to control. This is why I want us to stop thinking about like research chemicals and crazy ideas, and like get our sleep, our stress, our physical fitness, our speed of processing, our nutrition, our fasting. There are so many things we actually know that work really reliably across people now and can shore up so much of our need to perform and to not age inappropriately and to actually have trajectories of aging increase. Aging does this thing for most of us. Some of it does this, and you want to like stop that trajectory early in life. If it's doing this because you're oxidizing early in life, you want to flatten it as early as you can. That's what most of aging is. It's compression of morbidity, taking illness and shoving it in the last moment of life. You don't want to spend 30 years dying. You want to spend 30 minutes dying, And cardiovascular risk factors, sugar oxides in the brain, chronic stress, injuries and wear and tear that are not addressed over time. This is a trajectory dropper, and if you work really, really well, you can actually push resources up even after our age of being in our 40s and 50s and things. You can still actually improve, and just like the body, some things are harder. Like I'm pushing 50. You obviously are a more of an athlete physically. You have more experience training the musculature than I do. But, I'm 49. I can still put on, some muscles. I'm trying to shred 15 pounds of fat and put on 15 pounds of muscle on my 50th birthday, which is in January.
That's awesome. That's great.
And I'm about 185 right now, very doable for someone I'm 5'11". That's not a huge goal, but I have a systematic plan to go through and take some control. And I'm using tools like this for 6 or 8 weeks to cut. And then I'm going to use some other tools to make sure that I, bulk up a little bit. And I'm using TDEE calculators to look at, how I can drag down and then push back up the bulk in the right places. But I can only do that because of people like you who spend a lot of time figuring out what works, So I'm spending all my time right now watching the buff dudes on YouTube, all their little tips. Oh wait, what are these guys doing now?
The buff dudes.
Just like being like, what's up? So that I can be like, oh, cool. And I know most of this because I've been in fitness and in nutrition and health for like 30 years. But I often focus on this stuff.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important as a coach, as a biohacking coach, to walk the talk thoroughly. So, I want to look, like you, basically. I have the head for it already, right? I just need to.
That's it, man. That's it.
On this. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Like, yeah. Funny enough, you work on you work on the top half, and now focusing on the bottom. I've been forever trying to focus on the top half because I felt like it's always been lagging behind, you know?
Yeah.
But that's cool. All the tools that you have. And in fact, I want you to tell me the names of those things again a little bit later,
Sure.
perhaps after we've done with the
Yeah, we can put
recording.
them in the show notes for you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. What's the difference between a headache and a migraine? I hear people say, "Oh, I've got another migraine, another migraine." I'm like,
Yeah.
what is that? Like, it's very
Headaches
rare
are
I'll
poorly
get.
understood. Yeah, headaches are really poorly understood.
Right.
Migraines are neurological, meaning they're from the brain, from brain tissue. I view most migraines as actually vascular. I think they're vascular.
Right.
Something called a spreading cortical depression, an area of low metabolic activity will sweep through the brain because the brain recruits neighbors to do things. You know, like a low metabolic demand area, and it kind of will sweep through the brain. As it crosses influx for fuel, blood flow, those will reduce. And then the brain wakes up again and demands blood flow. And I think what's happening in many cases is a cramp. Is the blood flow can't open up fast enough. The brain cells are like, ah, and they're starving. And you see sparkly lights and other weird metabolic nausea and olfactory things. You have neurological symptoms before the pain.
Right.
What happens is that the cells are starving briefly and having weird misfirings, and that's the neurological stuff, the sparkly lights, the aura. And then the blood flow recovers, and you have the sense of the ache. And that's an inflammatory response. And that's a migraine. You know, it's sometimes one-sided, but not always. It also can involve different systems, and many things called migraines. You have migraines in your gut, believe it or not. The serotonin system in the gut can spasm and produce a migrainous type of process. Migraines can be driven by brain injuries. They're kind of like an instability thing, like a cramp almost. But it's a failure of blood flow being robust, I think. We also have tension headaches that can be unilateral, or we can have weird, circadian headaches, alarm clock headaches at 4 a.m. every day, wake you up with pain. That happens to some people. We do not understand headaches. They're a mix of muscle tension. They're a mix of the vascular things that I mentioned in migraines, and they're a mix of the brain perceiving pain that doesn't actually exist as a trigger, but it's getting some phantom signal from some chemical or some other thing, or it's interpreting something strangely, like a visual thing, picking up a pain response. But there's no real pain, no inflammation in the brain. Headaches are very poorly understood even by headache specialists. When I get headaches walking in the door, people with headaches, I want to know if they have this migrainous aura, these sparkly lights or weird kind of cognitive changes or perceptual changes as the headache or just before the headache shows up. Sometimes they show up instead of a headache for some people. That's really good news from my perspective, because now I can slap an infrared sensor in the head and exercise the vasculature, drop the severity, drop the incidence. But if it's a tension headache, maybe it's a dental thing for TMJ, or maybe you should go see a NUCA practitioner to work on the atlas and the axis bones, because you have a misalignment, deep in the skull, high in the spine, that junction point. There's no discs in there, just bone on bone for those atlas and axis, the C1, C2 there. So, those things can get crimped and produce all kinds of feedback loops in the cranial nerves that come out of there and wrap the face, in the musculature that's managed both in the neck, the shoulders, and the head by the afferents that come out right there. So headaches can be all kinds of things that you perceive as head pain that have very little to do with stuff inside the skull. And remember, the brain has no sensory nerve endings. You're not feeling your brain. Can't feel it. You're feeling the blood flow, the vasculature, the meninges that wrap the brain. There's nerves around those. There's nerves in the skull. You're feeling that, but you're not feeling your brain. So what you're feeling is in this little tiny top layer.
It did make me question, like you'd mentioned about the back attached to the brain. I can't even remember what you called it, but it did make me think about the central nervous system. Like, what is the connection there, and how is that? That's got to have something to do with sending signals around.
Oh yeah, there's more traffic coming in and out of those two bones, the atlas and the axis, than anywhere else in the body. There's more highway of nerves, blood flow, everything than anywhere else in the body, and those are free floating, without any padding, so those get pinched. One way you can address those is by seeing what's called a NUCA. Well, in the U.S. it's NUCA, North American Upper Cervical Chiropractor. In the UK, I'm sure it's not N because it's not North America. Maybe it's something else. But upper cervical chiropractors will do medical imaging of the alignment of the two bones just beneath your skull. And we use fulcrums lying on the side, and we'll readjust. It's not like cracking or like, that kind of adjustment. They'll just put fulcrum pressure on the bone and get to sink in a half a degree or degree in angle, and then re-image it with x-rays and do like stacking, you know, like look up at the ceiling and look at the vertebrae stacking across the head, look at the rotational, see how it stacks as you rotate. So UCCA, upper cervical chiropractors, will look at that. And if you have lots of weird things and headaches, that's one of the things I would make sure someone's at least ruled out, is pinched stuff in here, because it has such bizarre feedback loops in terms of balance and pain and headaches and nausea. Because the cranial nerves, we have 12 nerve clusters that leave the brain directly and come out and wrap around the body, mostly the face. So most of the nerves leave the brain down the spine, and then go out from the spine, make a junction, spinal ganglia to control this stuff, and then have inputs that way. But the brain has some direct input over all this stuff. The tongue, the face, you know, that's all directly controlled. So those nerves, as they exit back here and wrap around, can get pinched by stuff in the neck. And that's what Bell's palsy is. You know, sailors in World War II developed pea coats, those coats with high collars. It's not just a fashion statement because of the Beatles, whatever. You know, the pea coats are because in the ship, if you cool the back of your neck standing watch all day long, eventually it freezes up and you end up with like a spasm in your face, and you can't move your face, called Bell's palsy. So that's what pea coats have, this huge collar, is to keep the back of your neck warm when you're standing watch on a ship with breezes hitting the back of your neck all night long. And you can still get Bell's palsy for other reasons too, but it's constriction of these cranial nerves. So headaches, cranial nerve questions, or muscle tension questions, you know, or molecular and musculoskeletal things become a lot more interesting, I think, and need to be considered. You know, the physical is really important, not just the firings in the brain at that point, you know. So but I'm not a headache expert. I'm just, you know, if you have migraines, that's your brain. I'm excited because I can work on it. If it's not if it's not really a migraine, you should go do some Ashtanga, see a Nuka person. You know, it's musculoskeletal probably, in my experience, but headaches are really poorly understood. Yeah. So.
So what about, you see with the neurofeedback, if someone is interested in doing this, I understand you do it remotely, isn't it? They don't have to go to
brain mapping, the full head caps on the head, you know, and then we do the training. So we spent a couple of days teaching people to do the biohacking with EEG on your own head. We teach you to stick wires to your head, find the right place, run the software, and then we have remote coaching programs. We usually do 4 months of virtual supervision. We have a live support system for you, private access for your team, so you can quickly, right location for my head, or, you know, help with troubleshooting or something. And we can do the entire program now virtually. Even in 2019, we did a lot of it virtually, most of it actually. But in this new world, people not traveling as much, we now send out all the brain mapping equipment to people, and as well as the EEG. This is an EEG amplifier for doing training, and you simply stick some wires on your head. So there's little holes there. A simple training would be a couple wires, one there, and one right there. And for you and I, it's really easy to find. You know?
Yeah, that's right.
And then for your kid, you make a little part. You go to the mirror, make a little part, and stick a wire there with some adhesive paste briefly. It's not hard to do. And we teach you how to do it. And then you run the software, and we watch what's happening. And you tell us how you're feeling later on. My sleep did this, my stress did this, my migraines did this. And just like personal training, this is very iterative and very individualized. So the brain maps and the attention tests give us the sort of perspective on what might be the lowest hanging fruit and the biggest resources you might want to go after. And then you sort of, sorry, I just got interrupted. Bear with me 1 second. You have to edit this.
It's all good.
So the brain maps give us a starting place and help us understand what you might have in terms of the biggest resources to work on, and some of the things that are easy goals to accomplish. But then when you actually start training your brain, I mean, I'm sure you experience this when training individuals. You think, you know, it's going to happen, kinda, but every person's different, and every person needs to have the workouts and the specific interventions adjusted for them, you know? And it's kind of like I'm training brains. I mean, the metaphor would be if you wanted, I don't know, to do a chest press, and I had no idea how tall you were. And I go, all right, let's try it with a machine set for a 5-foot person. How'd that feel? Oh, I don't know. All right, maybe you're 6 feet. Let's try that. Oh, that felt better? So there's a lot of that in neurofeedback, because I can't actually get a very clear sense sometimes of what all will change. So we'll end up trying very broad things and then building up an understanding of your brain over time. And we can do that if you're in our offices. Most of them are in the US. We do have some services in UK and in Copenhagen, but most of our big offices are stateside. Or you can do it at home. And it doesn't really matter where you're doing it, because what I'm really looking for is, well, what happens later? How do you feel later?
Yeah.
Because that's the piece of it that will guide what happens next. And if you're a good self-reporter, oh, my sleep did this, my stress did this, my mood did this, my ADHD did this, my seizures, my migraines, I kind of just need to know, well, what happened? And then I can give you the next thing to push on your brain, and we together develop a better sense of, what's going to work for you over time. So
that's amazing. Is it actually useful for people that just want to optimize their brain, or do they have to have some sort of defect going on?
Yeah, no, I'd say about a third of my clients are ultra high performers, creatives, athletes, CEOs, people that really don't have anything wrong, but might not function. Like you were saying at the beginning of this call, not every day is your best per se. You're a high performer, but some days you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm dragging or whatever. You don't want to, do the task, put the effort in, or if you do put the effort in, maybe you're not as performant or as flexible, or if you are, maybe you're irritable or tired at the end of the day. Those are not a problem per se, but if you're trying to really push, I have a lot of people both in the sort of business world, CEOs and executives, as well as the creative world, both in pure creative, music and art, and athletic stuff, performance, if you will, stuff. And all those arenas will benefit. Musicians tell me they can get in the zone of their music. They're visualizing the music instead of reading ahead on their piano pieces. Or they're emoting their music instead of thinking about what they're playing. Athletes, this is a lot in golf. Golf is very mental, as you may know. And dropping your mind out of the process, you can release the proper overlearned, body mechanics is really the key in golf. And there's neurofeedback systems, actually practitioners whose entire job is working out on golf courts with a system. They follow golfers around and they train the brain to be in the zone while they're golfing. Or athletes, the NFL uses this a lot in teams to offset the wear and tear. Those guys, there's really serious high-end guys with a mild concussion. There's no performance issue, but they want to make sure there's not going to be one later on.
Yeah.
Because we know now that repetitive wear and tear of that type, American football type, produces seeds of dementia eventually. Repetitive wear and tear, brain damage does produce little areas that oxidize more rapidly and produce Alzheimer's-like phenomena, CTE we call that, But you can work out the brain and shrug off all that inflammatory stuff if it's mild to moderate. So, yeah.
Awesome. Would you say it's similar to like whether a person is doing neurofeedback remotely, or if they are in a do you call it a center or a clinic?
Training center. Yeah.
Training center. Is it pretty similar? Is it just as good if they was to do it from home?
Yeah, it is. It's the same software.
Okay.
It's the same people making decisions and supporting you. More actually, because you have a whole team jumping on, on your Slack channel when you have a question. The difference is some people aren't great candidates for self-training. If you're suicidally depressed, have a huge amount of trauma and no other support systems, this isn't a good thing to do. You get sore going to the gym, you get sore doing neurofeedback, your stress and sleep are thrown off here and there. You don't want to work with acute psychiatric stuff on your own. And also, like, every so often somebody sneaks into my remote trainer program who's really ADHD, and they don't train. They just don't do it. They don't like get the sessions in 3 times a week. So I'm not sure what the equivalent metaphor is, but I don't want people buying like the treadmill and hanging your laundry on it to dry. Like that's not like, and this is a few grand of hardware and software. This thing's $1,000, this amplifier. And the software is about the same. I don't want you like getting all excited, getting your brain mapped, getting the stuff and then shoving it in a drawer. I'm happy for you to like re-engage, but that's the concern with some people is the execution on it. Now we're actually having coaches actually schedule your remote visits for some people that want like an extra amount of hand-holding. They just schedule the self-training and then the person works for them to set it up every single time. Most of my clients, someone like you, would just grab some hardware and software, do a workshop at the beginning, and then have a shared log of your 4 months and a live support system. So we're checking in a lot constantly. You're like, oh, I'm setting up, but today I want to be more focused. all right, why don't you go up in frequency on this protocol? Or I
Amazing.
trained yesterday and I couldn't fall asleep. All right, let's do this today and you'll feel really chill. You know, so we're always kind of iterating and teaching you about the process of training for that 4-month course. So the home trainers get a different process. They really get self skills as well as effects.
Mm-hmm.
Like my buddy Ben Greenfield has a system, trained up on it, but he continues to train even after he got rid of his brain fog and some impulsivity, because he's like, great, I'm out, you know, doing my bow hunting or something. He'll like get back in the zone with his neurofeedback gear and then go back to bow hunting.
Why not?
Kind of silly. But like you can use it lots of ways.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to just be like fix my seizure. It can be like make me a better listener to my wife. You know, I get calls from CEOs all the time after doing alpha theta neurofeedback, which is flow state and access consciousness training.
Ooh, nice.
Creativity, and also boost your immune system pretty strongly. These guys, a few months in, will do a lot of alpha theta for creativity in theory. And more than a few times, I've gotten calls from their spouses the next day or an email. Thank you so much for whatever that thing you did yesterday was, because we had the best conversation we've ever had. They were calm, they were nuanced, they were sensitive. You know, you can decide to be that way and work those resources out. Nothing wrong with being a bit of a jerk. It's not an illness or being too rigid due to stress, but it's also not something you have to tolerate per se. You know, so that's really the take-home message is you have control over a lot of things, even things where you feel like your brain is not behaving or it's not, you know, following along. And that can be acute stuff, seizures, ADHD, autism. It can be really mild things like I'd rather not be burnt out or short with my partner at 5 p.m., you know, or I'd rather sleep more deeply. So because I'm going to, you know, like we can actually hack deep sleep. You know, think about the difference, a 12-week program for an athlete where you could continually boost deep sleep, slow wave sleep throughout those 12 weeks. Think about the muscle, like the mass differences you could put on, a few pounds at least, by just keeping deep sleep, you know, hour and a half or 2 hours all the time across 12 weeks. You know,
you could do that. That's brilliant. That is amazing. I'm in.
Yeah.
So
Let's get to some gear.
Yeah. So a person who wants to get involved, what is the website they need to visit, and who do they have to speak to? Are there loads of different practitioners? Do they speak to you? And
there's about 5. In our company, we do this, you know, virtually. It's a whole team, and so you can hit the website, Peak Brain Institute, or hit them on social media. Someone will send you information. We have a whole process, and the process changes a little bit depending on if you're doing it to yourself, you get a whole group, your coach or clinician doing it to other people. It's a little bit of a different pricing and relationship depending who we're working with. If you have your coaching roster, I wouldn't charge you the same for all your people, for instance, I would working with them one-on-one. So we have different ways of doing distributed and remote training. But for the average person, it's a pretty basic program. And I manage the brain mapping analysis for everybody. And then we have a handful of senior coaches who become your person to teach you stuff. The person makes sure that I haven't forgotten about you. So every week I'm case reviewing with them about you. And then the whole team, me and your coach, plus all the other support people are on your Slack channel. We Slack and give you a dedicated support system. So people can hit us up on social media or our website, and we'll send you the program information. Because there's a lot of hardware and software options, we like to sort of say, here are all the options. But essentially, it's about $2,000 or $3,000 set of hardware, depending on how you configure it, and it's about $3,000 or $4,000 in services, and that gets you 4 months of acute coaching, a lot of support, and then you have a good solid year of training ability because the clinical software has a year license on it, so you can keep cranking on those creativity or peak performance resources without ongoing cost. So that's awesome. The rough shape of that program.
So I was going to ask you about pricing. So there's no set pricing as such. It just really depends on each individual as to what they want to get.
Yeah. Well, Peak Brain does one price for brain mapping, the assessments, or $500 US, or in the UK, it's £500. And that's a one-time fee, and we remap you without charge. One weird thing we do is we give you access to the equipment after your first one for more data gathering without any charge. It's an ongoing education process for that first $500 fee, and then the training, it's kind of like the process is always individualized, and it always requires the same rough set of equipment, but some people might need different gear. Like if you have migraines or autism, you need the infrared blood flow training. But if you don't really need that. That saves $1,000 on the kit. You know, so the kit is $2.5 grand or $3.5 grand based on if you need infrared blood flow sensors, infrared cameras that you can attach to your head. And then for everyone, we do a 4-month coaching program, but within that program, we're doing very different things. Some person, it's bringing back eye contact or dropping sensory integration issues for autism. Someone else is helping them, shave time off their mile. Someone else, it's helping them do their musical recital with better creativity. Someone else, it's shutting seizures down or, getting rid of ADHD. It's always individualized. And some people have longer courses of training because different goals and different types of change. But in general, it's roughly the same program, just depends on how much gear. And there's some options. You can buy nicer, software games and things that are add-on cost. Mm-hmm. But, we charge less for a home deploy program where you own the hardware than a therapist would charge you for a 4-month program in their office, or about the same maybe. So it's about the same cost weight that you're front loading the cost because you're buying your equipment and then you're getting deep into it. So for the biohackers and the self-trainers, the mom with autistic kids, or the person who's far away from a city, it's great, same process. But a lot of people who are doing home training are folks that really have a longer trajectory with this stuff. Biohackers, the people with brain injuries who can train for like a year or more. People that want to really, really get deep into the technology because now it's an educational relationship as much as it is anything else. So
awesome. So the website is Peak Health.
Peak Brain Institute.
No, my bad.
.com.
peakbraininstitute.com. And the Instagram account is
Peak Brain LA.
Peak Brain LA.
All of our socials, Facebook, Instagram, Peak Brain LA. And I'm Andrew Hill, PhD in my Instagram, but that's mostly pictures of baked goods.
All right.
And lots of recipes. You want some great recipes for different breads and cakes and cookies. Occasionally they're gluten-free and low sugar. They're often kind of high carb too, because I do this metabolic flexibility thing.
Right.
I apologize, biohackers who are cringing at the idea of eating wheat, but I do something. My functional medicine doc, Dr. Hans Grun, who's amazing, pointed out in my genetics that I have no problem with gluten. I shouldn't probably eat a lot of wheat because I have some issues with wheat, but gluten itself is okay. So that gave me permission to re-embrace my 15-year-old baker skills, and start getting more deeply into it during the pandemic. So, but I have not stopped at sourdough. I've gone all pretty far afield. So if people want non-brain things to check out, I have lots of pretty pictures of loaves of bread on mine. Right. Andrew Hill PhD is that Instagram.
Cheers. I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah,
thank you very much for your time, Andrew. I truly appreciate it. It's been incredible. It really has.
Nice to talk to you. We'll have to get face-to-face at one of these points or get one of our colleagues over there in London to do a brain map on you soon.
Oh,
and then my hunch is we can do another show and talk about your brain if you want to, air your secrets a little bit in your speed of processing and stuff like that. We could always do it on the air for you. So.
Oh, that'll be exciting. That would be. I'll definitely be up for that, for sure.
Yeah, we'll have to arrange some video content of you getting your head mapped so folks can see what it's like.
Oh my God.
Julia Child, here's the brain I prepared earlier kind of thing,
They'll be surprised. Be like, is that his brain? It'll be fun though. Be great. All right, Andrew, thanks again. Let's catch up soon.
All right, so talk to you soon. Take care.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
You take care. Goodbye.